If you take two people, person A, strong work results, let's say weaker relationship with the boss. Person B, average work results, strong relationship with the boss. Okay, guess who tends to get the promotions? Person B. Now, this is I'm not trying to suggest some smarmy techniques to trying to get promoted. I'm not saying that, but what's the message out of that is it's relationships.
Welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. I'm your host Anushka Rajesh from the peopleHum team. Let's begin with a quick introduction of peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year and publish around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest, Andy Kaufman is the President of Leadership Excellence and Development in Development Inc., host of People and Projects podcast, award-winning project management and leadership keynote speaker, and a coach. He is also a certified trainer and author of Navigating the Winds of Change, Staying on Course in Business and in Life, Shining the Light on the Secret, and an ebook titled How to Organize Your Inbox and Get Rid of the Email Clutter, all published by Zurich Express. We're extremely happy and honored to have someone of his stature today on our interview series. Welcome, Andy. We're thrilled to have you.
Oh, man, I've been looking forward to this. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, the pleasure is ours. So the first question I had for you, Andy, was, you've had an exciting and interesting journey so far. So can you, in a nutshell, tell us the whole story of your success and how you actually came to be the President of Leadership Excellence and Development in Development?
Yeah, I started as a software developer, and my guess is there will be a fair number of people that are in your audience that are in technology or some sort of technology background, and many other areas as well. But I started as a software developer. I was promoted into management for all the wrong reasons. You know how sometimes somebody is good at this, so we're like, oh, let's make them a manager of that. And I made so many mistakes during that process. But during that, I also learned a lot. And as I became a manager and a director and a vice president, over time, what I learned was many things about how to develop teams and deliver. I have always had a passion for delivering. I started speaking at conferences just maybe once or twice a year. And at one of them, somebody came up to me and said, can you, actually what they said was, do you do this full time? Is this your full-time job? I'm like, you can do this full time? How does that work? I didn't know. And so I started spending time with people doing training and speaking and coaching. And I got to the point in around the year 2000 where I was really seriously considering this. I got some coaching and started the business in 2001. And a lot of it came down to saying yes to some opportunities along the way. And one of them was speaking at a Microsoft conference where it was in front of 7,500 people. And it was one of those things that really launched a lot of other opportunities. So I've been doing speaking and training and coaching and writing full time since 2001.
That's phenomenal. And I'm so glad that one person came up to you and in a way, just shaped your whole career. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And also, Andy, congrats on the success of your books.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So coming to the next question, people always say no one should hit the glass ceiling when it comes to learning yet. But, sometimes leaders can get really complacent with their existing knowledge pool. So what, in your opinion, is the first step towards stepping onto the path of continuous leadership improvement?
Yeah. There's a gentleman by the name of Ed Schein. He's an MIT fellow. He's now in his 90s. He just brilliant thinker. And I had him on our podcast way back in episode 25, I think it was. And one of the things that he talks about is that there's anxiety in learning, which is to say it's just easier to be complacent, like you said. There's anxiety in learning. And so generally we don't learn until survival anxiety is higher than learning anxiety. Think about that. Really what it's saying is we often wait until we're kind of pushed off the cliff to start worrying about how we deal with things. And so recognizing survival anxiety and learning anxiety. And that idea, I think, is really, really powerful. So people may feel like, well, I've got a pretty good position now. So we had Whitney Johnson on the podcast, and her whole book could be summarized as an S curve. That when you start a new role, like the first time you did an interview, you felt like you were down at the bottom of the S curve. Like, oh man, I've got a lot to learn. Now you're really smooth at this, right? You're really good at it because you've gone up the S curve. You've learned how to do this. And what happens, this is what Whitney's message is, what happens is when you spend too much time at the top of that S curve, you get complacent. So if you combine that with what Ed Shine said is you need to get yourself off the top of that S curve. You need to take on new opportunities. And so recognizing that we'll be tempted not to do that, that's Ed Shine's message. We'll be tempted to not do it. So I find that the way to implement Whitney's advice is you have to find a way to structure it. You have to find a way to make it a habit, some sort of forcing function. So for me, it's hosting a podcast. So I end up reading lots of books because I don't want to go into an interview blind about what the key messages are from that author. So that's a forcing function for me. For somebody, it might be listen to the peopleHum podcast. Listen to the resources, read the resources that you offer. It could be I'm going to read one book a month, one book a week, a podcast during workouts. But there's something about a forcing function or a habit or structuring it that, especially because I think your question was about kind of like early in someone's career, if you can structure it early, then it's a habit that just kind of keeps, you don't have to think about it. It's like, oh, I'm going out for a run, or I'm going out for a workout, or I'm going to go do a drive, or it's just a natural thing you do. And one last thing I would suggest as far as a first step, if someone is in a technology sort of field, don't listen to only technology sort of podcasts or articles or books. That there's a lot of wisdom in the diversity of what we expose ourselves to. And so thinking about broadening what we learn, that's part of Whitney's S curve, because there's no doubt that organizations will continue to get disruptions. Lately, it's been a pandemic. There will be other disruptions. And if we're not careful, if we get complacent, knocked off, that will be all of a job. We'll be replaced by someone younger who gets paid less. We'll just, we have to keep forcing ourselves to learn and to try new things. It's critical for us.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I really love the part where you tied learning anxiety and improvement anxiety. Is that right?
Yeah, learning anxiety and survival anxiety.
Survival anxiety, right. It was really interesting. And it's actually so true. And the way that you tied the whole thing of, you need to make it a habit so that it just flows automatically. Like you don't need to, after a point, put effort. That's I completely agree with you. That's great. Thank you for that fresh perspective, Andy. All right. So the third question I had for you was, in your opinion, how can leaders be better prepared to handle, the emotional friction that results sometimes from employees' failure or, just to overcome certain challenges posed by uncertain times?
Yeah. I suppose there's no easy answers to it, but here's some things I've learned is when I was in my late 20s to 30s, I went through a time where I felt more anxiety than I'd ever really felt before. And I felt like it was at times overwhelming. And that was new to me. And it felt very, very difficult. And I feel like that I learned a lot through that process. And I just continue to learn a lot about this. And I had a guy named Nir Eyal, I believe is how you pronounce it. He was episode 269. He wrote a book called Indistractable. It's a really interesting book on what causes distractions and things like that. But one of the things he talks about is it's called acceptance and commitment theory, ACT, A-C-T, acceptance and commitment therapy. And here's the interesting idea about it. It sounds fancier than what it really is. So let's say someone listening to us is like, oh man, Andy just used the anxiety word. I struggle a lot with anxiety, or I'm nervous about the future because of the pandemic or because of these other things. I'm wondering what, it's very easy to start worrying or to have these emotional reactions to things. It could be like people, it could be to situations. Well, within ACT or acceptance and commitment theory, one of the things that they talk about is too often when we feel these emotions, we try to squash it. We try to like stop feeling that way, calm down, or whatever. And I'm sure there's an emotion or a cultural component to this. Different cultures probably respond in different sorts of ways. But within ACT, one of the things you do is, like, first of all, just notice it. Just realize, like, man, I'm feeling really upset about this, or I'm feeling, so instead of trying to squash it, it's notice it and just be like, stop. I feel like sometimes we are our own worst enemy, and I think I've got enough friends from different cultures. I do a lot of work with United Nations. So I work with people all over the world all the time, on a regular basis, almost on a weekly basis. And so I just find, although it varies by culture, a lot of times we are our own worst enemies. We're beating ourselves up because we're feeling this. I shouldn't feel this way. This approach would just say, man, I feel kind of anxious about this, or I felt very offended by what they said. And it's less about ruminating on it. Like, I interviewed this expert on stress, and one of the things he said is, stress, I almost didn't interview him because the name of the book is Work Without Stress, and I thought he's like way overselling, but he defines stress as rumination. So when we sit there and we ruminate, that's the thing we're trying to get away from. So we're trying to notice it, not trying to squash it, but we're also not trying to ruminate as much as just kind of understand it, of like, yeah, I am feeling that. I wonder why that would be. And then there's a guy who created the, what's it called? The Harvard International Program on Negotiation. So it's Harvard's International Program on Negotiation, Dan Shapiro. One of the things that he taught me, this must have been something like episode 148, something like that. Anyway, he taught me something from his experience here about try not to be easily offended. So when there's emotion, when there's something that goes on, whether it's from somebody, something a politician says, something that a neighbor says, a loved one says, try not to be easily offended. So one is notice it, but the other is that Dan Shapiro, the guy we talked about, he said a lot of times what causes emotional issues is we feel like someone is attacking our identity. Yeah. Like, let's say you ask a question, and I don't know if I think this is audio only eventually when it goes out, but you and I can see each other. But let's say you ask a question and I give body language where I like, give a look at my face like, what was that? Like, that was a stupid question. Now, the look might say that, but that's not what I'm saying. Maybe it's not what I'm thinking. But we take things off, and we take feedback as attacks to our identity, and that causes some of these things. Man, if I lose my job, I must not be a good person. Or we take attacks of identity. So I learned this from a son who's in the film industry, and he said directors often will say, here's my film. Now let's pretend I'm holding a DVD case right in front of me, okay? And so give me feedback on my film. And someone gives feedback, and every time they give me feedback, it's like, I take it personal. What this director told him is, no, you hold, I'm holding, let's say, the DVD case off to the side now. Give me feedback on my film. And when they're giving feedback on the film, it's not to my identity, it's about my film. And I think if we can look at these emotional things, that regardless of what's causing them, and say, well, first of all, let's accept it. Let's not necessarily discount it. Let's look at it as, it's not necessarily my identity. Maybe that's what's going on. Don't be easily offended. Yeah. And so one last idea I'll put on this one is, I learned this from a guy named Peter Boghossian. He wrote a book called, actually, I think he pronounced it Boghossian. He wrote a book called How to Have Impossible Conversations. He was our episode 284. And he has a quote that I won't get it exactly right, but it was something along the lines of, if you have to make assumptions about someone's intentions, make only one assumption. Their intentions are better than what you think. So if it's an emotional reaction to something that someone did, don't be easily offended. Assume better intentions than maybe what you might be thinking, and let it sit for a while. Learn to get comfortable with the emotions. Learn to get comfortable with them. That doesn't mean you're anything bad. So these are things I'm learning still. I mean, I feel like this is a for all of us, but I think we're in a world where make bad go away, distract. And I think there's something about being able to feel these things and think them through and just find other ways to reframe it. I guess that's how I would say I'm on my personal journey on this. How I'm looking at it.
Right. I love the insight that you gave us, Andy. And I agree with the fact that, this is like a lifelong journey and we're constantly in the process of reinventing ourselves. So that's great. And so you spoke a lot on the mindfulness aspect, being aware of yourself. So I think that is also one concept that's really been spoken about, especially with the pandemic. So that's great. Thank you, Andy. So, in your opinion, how do you think young leaders can be more proactive in leading while going forward in life, especially now with the situation?
So here's an example. I wasn't just out of college, but I was still pretty young in my career when I got off from Microsoft and they said, you're using some pretty cool technology in your team. Would you be willing to present at this conference? Now, I said before, there's like 7,500 people at this conference, is the Tech Ed conference. And at that time, if I had to speak in front of 10 people, I would have been freaked out. Just 10 people, not 500 people. So saying no, I had every reason to say no to this. Okay. For some reason, the words "sure" off of my lips. And after I said it, I'm like, why did I say that? That's a terrible idea. And yet it led to so many other opportunities. So the first thing I would suggest to people newer in their career is, unless there's a compelling reason not to, say yes. Even if it feels like a massive stretch, say yes. Because almost always by saying yes, it leads to other opportunities. Now, there are exceptions to that, but here's what I found. I interviewed a guy named David Epstein. Personally, and the reason I'm mentioning these books is people want to follow up, and is for additional reading. So David's book is called Range. And it's like one of his big messages to people new in their career would be, he calls it sample, which means try lots of different things. There's so much pressure right now on people right before university, in university, and just after university, where people are saying, well, what's your plan? What's your plan? What are you going to do? And inside, I mean, they've got an answer on the outside, but inside they're like, I don't know. They're feeling family pressure to do what mom or dad wants them to do, or they're feeling like maybe I should go into accounting because I'll at least get a job or whatever. They're doing things out of obligation. David's thing is sample. And the way to sample is to say yes to opportunities. Because when I was in my early 20s, I could never have envisioned that I would be making millions of dollars as a speaker. I would never have envisioned that. In fact, that would have been the worst thing in the world to me as a job. And I wouldn't have known it unless I sampled. I said yes, and I tried it. So what I'd recommend is, if someone's listening to us and they've been hesitating to say yes on something, look for opportunities to say yes. And here's why. There's a guy named Mark Efron who wrote a book called 8 Steps to High Performance. And when I was interviewing him in our podcast, he talked about this thing called the 70-20-10. 70-20-10. It's usually shown as like either dashes between the numbers or slashes between the numbers. But the idea is that 70% of the way that you and I and everyone listening to us, the way that we learn is by having to do it. So what's the best way to learn how to lead projects? Have to lead projects and probably making a lot of mistakes. But 70% of the way we learn is not through the book. That's the 10%. 70% is by doing it. 20% is mentoring, have seen it modeled, and 10% is the book or the class or something like that. So if we can develop the habit, we talked about structuring and habits before, let's develop the habit of saying yes even though it seems kind of scary, I'm going to take on that opportunity. Sample. Remembering that I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. That's going to help me up the S curve. That 70% is how I'm really going to learn. Every once in a while I hear somebody say, oh, I can't wait to get out of university. I teach at a business school. And so, I can't wait till school's over. When school's over, it's just our education begins in many ways, right? So just saying yes, realizing this is how I learn. And one last thing, I learned this from a guy named Wayne Baker. He wrote a book called, I think it's called All You Have to Do Is Ask. I'm pretty sure that's the title of it. All You Have to Do Is Ask. He was episode 278 or so on our podcast. He's like, one way that we are our own worst enemy is we don't ask enough. And so the idea of asking might be, ask somebody who's a little higher in the organization, could we go to lunch? I have some questions. It's a little bit of that 20 of the 70, 20, 10 of asking for mentoring. You don't need a formal mentoring program, but ask questions. Try to draw on the wisdom of people who've already figured this out. It almost sounds like a cliche that everything you always wanted is on the other side of an ask, but we don't make ask. And so I think there's something really powerful about, if you want something, ask, and not in an entitled sort of way. There's a book coming out later this month that I haven't published the episode because the publisher asked to wait until the book comes out. Actually, I probably got a copy of it laying around here, but it's called Game Changer. Game Changer. Michael Solomon is one of the co-authors. And they actually have a templated email. Say these things to customize it. But the equivalent of someone might say, I really want to be in more of a leadership role. Like maybe they're not a manager yet, but they want to get into a frontline manager role. Well, they've got email templates how to make the ask. Now, of course, you'd have to customize it to the need and things like that. But I think, and once again, there's a cultural component to this, where some cultures are much more likely to aggressively, proactively advocate for themselves. And then some other cultures are going to be much more reserved. But I think there's something about asking for what you want, not in an entitled sort of way, of like, I want to be in a manager role sometime within the next year. What do I need to do to get there? I will do everything I need to, but it's, making an ask like that. And I think if we sample, if we realize we're going to make mistakes, but this is how we learn, and we make the ask, that can really help us when it comes to advancing our ability to lead. And actually, just one last thing on that ask. Her name was Carrie Marable, I think it was, something like that. You don't even have to read her book. Her title says it everything. Her title says everything. The title of the book is You Already Have the No. And the point is, sometimes people don't ask because they say no. They're just going to say no. And she's like, you already have the no, so make the ask. Because if you make the ask and they say no, it's no different. But they might just say yes. And I think a lot of times people are willing to say yes if we don't come in as entitled, we don't come in as arrogant, we're humble enough to say, I will do everything I can to achieve that, but I'm looking for your advice, I'm looking for your input, that these are all things that I would have loved to hear when I was early in my career, because I didn't do this thing. I just assumed that over time, good things will happen, get a job that I like and that, pays well or something like that. But I didn't sample enough. I didn't make enough asks. I wanted to do the things that I felt like I was good at. I wasn't taking enough risks. So that's advice that I certainly share with my children as well, but I share with everybody.
Lovely. That was so enlightening. And I feel it's really imperative to really come out of your comfort zone and try new things and have an open mind. That's so vital. And I feel experience is really what counts, right? I mean, you never know what you can do unless you do it.
Right.
So, right. That was really insightful, Andy. So just to kind of wrap this interview up, it's been such an honor talking to you, and I got such lovely insights. Do you have any last sound bites you'd like to leave our audience with? I'd like to ask you that.
Oh, yeah. No, I appreciate asking. I would say something I felt like I did not learn in university is this. The dirty little secret of business is that everything comes down to relationships. Yeah. So I think a lot of times we think it's the smartest one who wins, the highest GPA, the high test scores, the best looking or whatever. I mean, there's wealthiest. I think there's all kinds of things that we easily get distracted by, and sells books. But the dirty little secret of business, everything comes down to relationships. There's so many examples I can think of research behind this. Eric Barker wrote a book called Barking Up the Wrong Tree. It's a play off his last name. And he told me during an interview, and once again, audio would be more difficult to get this, but if you take two people, person A, strong work results, let's say weaker relationship with the boss. Person B, average work results, strong relationship with the boss. Okay? Guess who tends to get the promotions? Person B. Now, this is I'm not trying to suggest some smarmy techniques to trying to get promoted. I'm not saying that, but what's the message out of that is it's relationships. When we've got strong relationships, someone might say, look at Sanjeev, I trust Sanjeev. I feel like I look at Shripi and I feel like she is somebody that I can trust because there's relationship there. And, we talked about making the ask. You're more likely to get a yes from the ask when there's relationships. So we often think of relationship building as things to do when we're looking for a job. Relationship building should be like breathing. We are constantly, not in some utilitarian, I'm trying to get something from someone. It's because this is the richness of life, people, relationships. We learn from this. And I understand that culture and gender, and there's a lot of things that can play into this that can make it easier or more difficult. I would love for people to get all the good things that are going to happen to you are likely going to be happen because you've got a relationship with somebody and they are willing to take the risk with you. They're willing to introduce you to someone. They're willing to share some of their wisdom, and that they're going to give you a recommendation of a book, whatever. That it's based on relationships. And to reinforce this, Herminia Ibarra, London School of Business professor, joined us to talk about her book, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader is the name of the book. And she's got a quote that's something like this, that left to our own devices, we build a network. So we're talking about our relationships. We build networks that are narcissistic and lazy, which is to say we build relationships with people who are like us. That's a narcissistic. So people vote like us, who worship like us, who are in similar, maybe the same business unit or division. So narcissistic is we surround ourselves with people who are like us, and lazy in that we develop relationships with people who are easy to develop relationships just because we're in proximity, which when people are working remotely a lot, that makes it more difficult to build relationships because you're not running into them at the water cooler, so to speak. So her point is stretch yourself, build relationships with people who are not like you, cross-cultural, cross as many different ways. That guy at Harvard, Daniel Shapiro, says we get very tribal. He's like, be a part of as many tribes as possible. So growing up, I'm not just part of the IT tribe. I've got good relationships in marketing. And by doing that, it makes our projects go better because it's not like a us versus them. Dan Shapiro calls it the relentless we. Be a part of the relentless we, not me versus you. It's the relentless we. And if we can really get that the dirty little season, that's all done in relationship, we just realize it takes the pressure off us. I don't have to know everything. I don't have to be the smartest one in the room. But what I'm going to get masterful at is building relationships with people. And so I don't have to rely on just Google when I've got a question. I've got somebody who knows something about that. So that's what I would leave you with there.
That's amazing, Andy. In fact, there's this quote, your vibe attracts your tribe. So I think this was a perfect, what you said really resonated with that. And it's absolutely essential, just to be humane with others, especially in this digital age with the pandemic that we're living in. I think we've learned to actually, cherish the human relationships more than ever. Yeah.
Yeah, right on.
Okay, Andy, it was such an honor to interview you, and I'm so glad and thankful that you chose peopleHum, and you took out the time to share your views with us. And I had a wonderful, wonderful session. I mean, I can't smile more. It was so enlightening, and honestly, I learned so many things in this half an hour session. So I'm sure that our audience are going to benefit from it as well.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to join you. I appreciate reaching out. I'm usually on the interviewer side of things, and so it's a real pleasure to be able to be on this side and have someone with your skills on the other side. So you high five through the camera here. You did very good job. Thank you very much.
100%. Yes. And we shall surely stay in touch. And
Yes.
you please have a happy and healthy time ahead of you.
Thank you. Have a great evening. See ya. Thank you. Bye-bye.